Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I will be looking at the week starting on Monday, October the 27th, 2025. And this video is a preview. I will start off by doing a preview of the week ahead from an astrological viewpoint, and I'll be looking at the main astrological events taking place over the course of a week. And another way of looking at the week is through the I Ching. And I will be doing an I Ching reading, and I will be looking at the week from four perspectives: the perspective of the general situation, and then money, and then career, and finally relationships. So let's start off with the astrology. So here is the chart for the week, starting at midnight on Monday, October the 27th, New York time. So if you look at this chart, you'll notice that the beginning of a week, Mercury is at around 27 degrees Scorpio. In other words, Mercury is getting ready to change signs. And, it's, quite an important sign change. Mercury moving out of a water sign, into a fire sign. Mercury in Scorpio has a certain reputation for being quiet and perhaps not for talking too much. Mercury in Scorpio, Scorpio's a mute sign. Scorpions apparently don't make much noise, and then it's moving into Sagittarius, and Sagittarius can be a noisy sign. Now, Mercury in Sagittarius is in its detriment, and that means it's in the sign opposite the sign it rules. So Mercury rules Gemini. Mercury, all things being equal, works very well in Gemini. But in Sagittarius, Mercury can be hasty. It can jump to conclusions. It can, very much want to reach conclusions, but sometimes it acts too quickly and can, in certain instances, reach the wrong conclusion. So watch out, for that changeover. And then Mercury, as the week progresses, it starts to move towards a sextile to Pluto in Aquarius. So Mercury sextile Pluto. I mean, it's not a hugely important aspect, but it is exact. I think on Thursday the 30th, and Mercury sextile Pluto can perhaps provide a bit of balance. Mercury in Sagittarius can jump to conclusions, but maybe the sextile to Pluto can give Mercury some, much needed intensity, can help it focus on the things that matter. Now, while all this is going on, we have got a grand trine in water signs. So what happens is that on Tuesday the 28th, Mars is making a trine to Jupiter. There it is. You've got Mars in Scorpio, trine Jupiter in Cancer. And then on Wednesday the 29th, you've got Mars in Scorpio making a trine to Saturn in Pisces. So Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn forming this configuration, this grand trine, that is quite powerful. And it might say something about how we assert ourselves. Mars in Scorpio, and Mars in Scorpio trine Jupiter in Cancer, that can be about finding it very easy to be assertive. Maybe not us finding it easy, maybe someone else, but if we want to throw our weight around, make things happen, maybe we can, but we have to be a bit careful. Mars trine Jupiter, we might lose control. Well, maybe Saturn is going to help. Saturn is a controlling influence, so the fact that Mars moves from a trine to Jupiter to a trine to Saturn could be quite constructive. So maybe it's all about harnessing our energy in a constructive way. Yeah, there might be things that we get angry about. We want to make things happen quickly, but Saturn might provide some, much needed restraint. And, we see Saturn cropping up again, at the end of a week when the Sun makes a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. So you can see at the beginning of a week, the Sun is at 4 degrees Scorpio. And so when it reaches around 11 degrees Scorpio, or something like that, there is a sesquiquadrate, a 135-degree aspect between the Sun and Saturn. And this aspect could be problematic. We might find as we move into the weekend that things do get slower. Sun in Scorpio in a fixed sign, sesquiquadrate Saturn, something is holding us back. And perhaps the promise of the beginning of a week with Mercury moving into Sagittarius and that grand trine in water signs, that did promise so much. It seemed that so much was going on, and then by the end of a week, things might just get slower and slower, and it might just feel that it's all grinding to a standstill. But don't worry about it. The Sun sesquiquadrate Saturn, is quite brief, and I will be going into these aspects in much greater detail in my daily horoscopes. So now I want to turn to the I Ching. So remember, with the I Ching, it's optional. If you don't want to have your I Ching read, you don't have to have it read. You can just stop watching this video. And my I Ching reading only applies to those who are actually watching me deliver it. So now's your chance to leave if you don't want your I Ching done. So anyway, I asked the question, what is the week starting on Monday, October the 27th going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And remember, I'm going to be answering this question from 4 views: general, money, career, and relationships. Anyway, the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 48, which is the well. So the well is a permanent structure. It's something that should just, always be there. Things don't change. We're always going to need water. Every community needs water. And so the basic way of getting at water is through a well. You dig a hole and there's the water. And so what does this mean? It refers to just things that are there all the time. Perhaps things that we almost take for granted. And it's asking us, in a general sense, to just to be quite focused on this. What is it that sustains us? Things change. A lot of things change over the course of a lifetime. Over the course of several lifetimes, things change, but always you need that well. And so this hexagram is very much asking us to look after what we have. It's not just about water. It's about those talents that we just have all the time. Maybe we learnt certain skills. Maybe we were born with certain skills. It depends on your view, whether you go for a sort of a nature or nurture approach. But, think about who you are and, what you have. And it's not just about you. It may be about your society, your community. And so think about, what sustains you and, everyone else around you. Now, this hexagram has 2 moving lines. The third line moves and the fourth line moves. And the third line relates to a well with clean water. Water is great, but no one's using it. It is kind of going to waste. And so, what does that mean? It might mean that some of us feel that we have something to offer, something very important and unique to offer, but we're being ignored. No one seems to care. It may be us ignoring it. Maybe we've got skills which we really should be using, Perhaps they're the kind of skills that really make us stand out, but we're not interested. So that's one way of looking at it. Or it could be that we understand what our skills are. We understand what makes us special, but it doesn't make any difference. We are not being recognized. And that could be very frustrating. So, for example, if you're applying for a job or you're looking for recognition, it's just not going to happen. At least it might feel that it's not going to happen. And that is something you need to think about. It could be, something else. It's an area where we try very hard. We put a lot of effort in, but it doesn't seem to make any difference. We know we've done a good job. We know we deserve praise and recognition, but it's just, not happening. And then the fourth line moves. And the fourth line is also talking about something not being available, but for different reasons. And what you have here is a well in a state of disrepair, and it needs to be fixed. So it could be about work in progress, or perhaps we recognize that we're not being treated fairly, that we're not being appreciated, that maybe we're being ignored. And then we move to the next stage. We think about, well, what do we have to do? And so we have to work on something. And while we're working on something, there's no recognition, because it's being repaired, and it may relate to something very literal. It may be about something very important to you that you can't use because it's being fixed. I mean, it could be your car, it could be some household appliance, your computer. It just needs to be fixed. And when something is being fixed, you can't use it. So that might be how this hexagram works. But overall, there is some frustration that you're not being taken seriously. So what do you do? And I think the hint there is a transition from the third line to the fourth line. Something needs to be repaired, something needs to be sorted out, and your approach needs to change. Although there is a view that if you are not being recognized, for example, by someone in authority, then that person in authority needs to be replaced. I don't know whether you are in whether you have the ability to create that kind of revolution, but it's not really about revolution. It's about reform. And there is a difference between reform and revolution. So it's true that something needs to be changed, but I don't think that it needs to be, overturned. And, because we have two lines moving, it means that we move to a second hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 47, which is oppression. By the way, it should not be the oppression, it just should be straight oppression. So hold on, let me just remove the definite article. Sorry about that. There we are. Okay. Oppression, 47. And so, oppression sounds bad. I mean, it is oppressive if we're not being recognized, if we're not being taken seriously, if we're being ignored. But oppression is not the end of the world. It's certainly not as bad as it looks, although it certainly does look bad. I mean, if you look at the hexagram that symbolizes oppression, we have top three lines represents the lake, and the bottom three lines represents the abyss. So there's your lake with all this clean water, or you might think of the well with the water, and there's a hole in that lake, and all the water is flowing out. And we might feel quite exhausted and just overwhelmed by what we have to do. And it's even more difficult if we're not being recognized. And with this hexagram, we kind of have to soldier through. Just because we're not being recognized, we're not getting any support, doesn't mean we have to stop what we're doing. But the trouble is, it is just so easy to do it. I mean, it depends who you are, but I don't know. Certainly, if I'm not recognized, if for example, I look at my YouTube videos and I'm not getting enough views, not getting enough comments, yeah, it bothers me. I suppose that's why I tell people, don't forget to like and subscribe. That's an example. I feel that, why am I doing this? I'm not complaining, by the way. I'm just giving you an example. So if we're not getting recognition, we can ask ourselves, what is it for? And it's very human. But the message here with oppression is to keep moving, to take that burden, and it is a burden. And we might feel that it's a burden, but we just need to keep going with it, and we are going to make it. We're going to reach the end of a line. We're going to, reach, I don't know, the end of a race, whatever it is. We're not going to trip up. We're going to make it, and yeah, we can do it. So it perhaps just represents hard work and a lot of responsibility, and yeah, that responsibility feels even more burdensome if you're not getting enough recognition. And perhaps you need to move beyond recognition. It's not about how much praise you're getting. It's about whether or not you're doing the right thing. And then there is money. And the first hexagram is hexagram number 48, which is the well. And so from a financial perspective, the well represents our resources. And, we all have resources. We all have some basic access to money, even if we've got no money at all. We've got something. And it needs to be looked after, and it needs to be safeguarded, even if it's not much money. But, whatever we have needs to be protected, and it's something that sustains us. And so it's not just the money itself we need to be thinking about, it's the source of that money. And of course, if you're thinking about wells, it's not like that water just magically appears. It comes from somewhere. Maybe it comes from underground, maybe it comes from an aquifer or an underground stream or whatever it is. I mean, water is a complicated subject, and we just have to make sure that flow is able to constantly maintain itself. And we have to safeguard ourselves. And, okay, this is a hexagram for this week, so it is asking you to think about that. And, we've got two moving lines here. And, the third line moves. And the third line moving does indicate that something seems to be wrong. It's just not quite right financially. And, we have perhaps made our position clear in a financial sense. We have got a good understanding of not just how our money should be working, but also how other people's money should be running. But maybe we're just being ignored, and being ignored could be important. For example, if we're seeking financial advice, you go to someone for financial advice, whether it's formal or informal, and they just tell us what to do. They give their opinion, but we get an opinion that is not based on our own reality. We are being ignored. And I think being ignored and our own views on money and our own concerns as well might be being ignored. I mean, we might have genuine concerns about money, feeling that we're not being paid enough, that someone else is being unreasonable, or we're having to pay for something and someone else is not. So we feel that we're not getting enough attention, and still, we're getting ignored. And then we look at it again, and we realize that there is a larger issue going on, that something needs to be changed, that our approach to our finances and our attitude to money is not good enough, and maybe it needs to be fixed. It needs to be repaired, because the fourth line moving, it talks about a well needing repair. And I think that in this case, it's whatever is sustaining us financially needs to be sorted out. And so we must basically assume there's a problem and then work to fix it. And that is something that we can do. Now, it may not be easy because this hexagram, the well, does move to hexagram number 47. And, by the end of a week, we may feel that there's a lot of responsibility. And that might be what oppression means. Oppression is not necessarily a situation which is disadvantageous. It just means that it's all down to us. We're not being listened to. Other people are not being helpful. Maybe their advice is not being helpful. And we still feel that something needs to be done, something needs to be said. And so oppression is perhaps about carrying the weight of maybe other people's financial needs. I mean, it could be that we're having to pay for other people. Other people have things they need, and for one reason or another, we're having to spend more than we'd like to do. But again, it goes back to responsibility. It's not just about someone taking advantage of us. It just might feel that it's all down to us to make the decisions because other people just aren't in any fit position to do so. Or okay, maybe it's not that bad, but we have to be aware of that responsibility and perhaps be prepared to carry out that responsibility. And then there is work and career, and we start off with hexagram number 48, and this part of the hexagram may not apply to everyone. Not everyone has a job. Some people are retired. It does depend. But if career is of interest, is of importance, then I think that the well kind of represents what we can do. It kind of represents the tools of the trade, what we're good at, what we're always good at. Things change, technology changes. People are concerned about obsolescence and AI. AI, the obsession of AI. We're all going to lose our jobs. I mean, AI and astrology. I mean, maybe soon you'll be just looking at some avatar that's talking just the same as me. Maybe it's just going to be listening to me and is, whatever skills I have can just be computerized. But, we shouldn't be thinking like that. We should be thinking about what we have. And so that is the first question. And whoever you are, whatever the situation, you have very definite talents, very definite skills that, you have learned over time, and they are important. They are your trade. And we have the third line moving. And the third line moving may mean that you feel that you're being neglected. You've got things that you can do well, but you're not doing it. It feels like a shame. It feels incredibly annoying and frustrating. You can do things better than other people, but no one seems to care. Is it because you are irrelevant? Because things like AI have made you obsolete? No. It's not like that. It's just someone perhaps hasn't been bothered. They haven't been bothered to realize what you can do. And perhaps that's not your fault. Maybe you should have been more pushy. But then the fourth line moves as well. And the fourth line is about repair. I mean, literally, it's a well needing to be repaired. But it might be about your own abilities needing to be repaired. So you might have skills which are slightly out of date. You're not aware of the latest developments. And so perhaps you have to go over what you're good at and just refresh things. What do they call it? Continued professional development or whatever it is. So, don't be complacent, but don't be modest at the same time. Yeah, you've got important skills. Maybe you're not using those skills in the right place. or in the right areas. Maybe that's why it's being neglected, and maybe you need to make some presentational changes. And so that might be what that fourth line means, making some changes and perhaps presenting yourself in a different way, and then you will see the dividends. I mean, it might not be easy, and if you're applying for a job, this is particularly important. I know that unemployment in certain areas is increasing, and it could be that you feel frustrated that you can't get a job because people just don't seem to recognize who you are and what you can do well. And it's just a question of changing the presentation, making sure the right people see your resume, or something like that. Now, this hexagram, the well, does move. It moves to hexagram number 47, which is oppression. And this hexagram needn't be so bad, and it's kind of indicating that if you want things to happen from a career perspective, you're going to have to perhaps take on new responsibility, and to begin with, this responsibility might not be recognized. You perhaps have to take it upon yourself to show what you can do. Perhaps you have to go above and beyond the call of duty, and it could be exhausting. But what you're doing is that you're demonstrating how effective you are. And perhaps you have to take on board a new burden. Again, not something you want to do. It's unfair. But if you are able to take that burden, then I think that in the end you will be recognized. So don't feel that it is for nothing. And finally, we have relationships. So we start off with hexagram number 48, which is the well. And maybe this is saying something about the people in our lives. That's one way of looking at it. Or how other people see us. We can take people for granted in the same way that other people can take us for granted. People are just there all the time, like furniture in the room, and nothing's going to change. People aren't going to disappear. They're not going to walk out. Relationships will continue, and you expect that pattern of relationships to continue. And because it's the well, there is something incredibly static about it. But there is a feeling of people being taken for granted here, and that's because the third line moves. You've been there all the time, so it's assumed you'll be there in the future, and maybe you will be. And it works both ways. You could be taking advantage. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong word. Taking for granted other people, and clearly, this is not a healthy situation. You have to certainly show some respect. Even if people are unchanging, even if people always are there, you have to kind of be dynamic and perhaps understand that people's needs change, and you have to recognize people, even if it's difficult, in the same way that you expect to be recognized. Now, the question is, what happens if there is no recognition? If people continue to take each other for granted? And, then perhaps we move to the fourth line. And the fourth line is about repair. Something needs to be changed. And I think there is a hint here that relationships, particularly existing relationships, are not entirely satisfactory, that something needs to be changed. Perhaps we need some life here. We need some appreciation. And again, appreciation works both ways. You have to appreciate in the same way that other people need to appreciate you. And so that's something that you should really strive for over the course of a week. And, it might seem unfair, if you have to make the effort. And I think this lack of fairness is really demonstrated by the hexagram that this all moves to. I mean, this, because we've got two moving lines, we move to hexagram number 47. And hexagram 47 can be about you feeling oppressed. However much you try, however much you try to change things, you might still find that you're being taken for granted. Or if you're in a relationship, it's you having to make all the effort. And yeah, it does seem unfair, and you might sort of resent it. But things change, and we're talking about 1 week, and it just may be that you do have to take the burden. Whatever that burden is in terms of relationships, maybe it's down to you to make the decisions, maybe it's down to you to take the initiatives, maybe it's down to you to take the responsibility. Other people just don't seem to be interested, or they're not perhaps in the right state of mind to take responsibility. You've got to consider the human dimension. Always you've got to consider the human dimension, because you don't really know fully what's going on. And so yeah, taking responsibility might be tough, but I think it is the right thing to do. And if you can sort of bring yourself to bear the situation, I think that your patience will, in the end, be vindicated. So that is it. That's all I've got to say about this week. I hope you have a good week, and thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again very soon.